Hi, Karen. Hi, Manish.
Hey, how are you?
I'm good. How are you?
Hello.
Good. So can we see other people's video or no?
Um, let's find wait, did anyone? Let's see.
Yeah, hold on
Okay.
1 second. Let me close the door here. All right. Cool.
Okay. Yeah, so this is the first time we're using this link and it was like a CNCF provided Zoom link. But I don't know that I have admin rights. Oh wait, let's see. No, I don't. Um, do we think that we will need that? If so, I will go ping them.
Well, the big question is, okay, can I share my screen? Let's see. Screen two. I'm going to try and share my screen. Let's see what happens. Can everybody see my screen?
Yes.
All right, so I'm going to stop sharing, but that means that we don't need it for that. It's always a good idea to have admin rights if you can get it, but
Yeah.
you know,
Let me ping Amy because I think the only other thing is like even though you can share your screen, I don't know if that means like if someone else tries to, it'll kick you off from sharing your screen because everyone's
yeah,
equal, right?
right,
Yeah.
right. Well, and the other thing is, I didn't know if you noticed, but if you didn't RSVP, you can't join the Zoom.
Because the link isn't public, right?
Well, yeah, there's the link is public, but the problem is that Zoom asks you to sign in, and
Oh, that part.
and I don't know
I
if those are
don't
connected or not.
I don't think they are. I think I had it set so you can only see the link if you RSVP on Meetup.
Oh, that maybe that's
Um,
the case.
yeah. And then I don't think it cross-references the like signups though.
Okay,
Okay, let me see.
but yeah, I needed a Zoom account to join,
Yeah.
which maybe that's good on these public meetups. I don't know.
Yeah, because I think at least there's a record of like who made a violation or whatnot. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, and yeah, you don't want some rando, jumping in with who knows what content. So
No, don't want that.
yeah, all the Zooms that I've been doing are private calls, so that's not been an issue really.
Hey, y'all, how's it going?
Hey, Zach.
Good, hey Zach.
Hey, Manish, how are you?
Good. It's been a while.
Yeah, it has been. Anything new with you? How you and Mark doing? You guys still rocking and rolling?
Good. Yeah, I'm still, rolling the startup forward, trying to get our market timing right, moving things forward as we can.
Yep.
Haven't seen a fundraising deal that I like yet, so we've been
Okay.
just laying low. If there were terms that I was willing to accept, then
Yeah. Well, it's nice to be able to be picky.
yeah.
Yeah.
Well, like I said, it is certainly possible to do a fundraise that ruins your company, but you don't know
Okay.
that it's ruined your company until 5 years later.
Yeah, yeah, no doubt about it. Huh. Well, good. Glad to hear you guys are still moving things forward.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, we'll
How
talk
about you,
about
Karen?
it.
How's stuff in the Bay Area?
The air is clear. That's
Oh, that's good.
um, yeah, so I mean that was kind of like the main big thing for a while. Otherwise, yeah, things are good. Yeah, I mean, I work for a big company, so stability is nice and like something I'm trying to like remind myself of right now because
Right.
yeah.
Yeah. Unless you work for
Uh,
Snowflake, then yeah. Although they're a big company now too by those standards.
real quick, do what do we want to like at the start of the meetup? Is there anything that we need to bring up? I was just gonna make a note of like mentioning to people that the meetup is moving from meetup.com to Bevy. And then Zach, did you want to make an announcement about the forum you have?
Yeah, happy to. I have a form here with a link, so I'll make that
Cool,
announcement and then I'll just drop it in the chat so people can click on it.
cool.
Yep.
Okay. I just pinged Phil to see if he wanted to log on and make sure everything works as well. And that's the other speaker. And then it looks like this call is recording, so we can maybe do something with that after. Yeah, just because I think CNCF sets all their calls to recording.
Got it.
Like,
Okay.
yeah. Let's see.
Good. Hopefully we can get the replay somewhere and share it out.
Yeah.
Karen, have you done these anywhere else yet? Have you done them for different meetups or anything yet, or is this first time for you too?
First time I participated in a meetup yesterday. It was like the Dutch Kubernetes meetup, and they used a platform, I think it was called StreamYard, and it was just something that like it just had like the speakers displayed, and there's like a back end where you could like chat with like, you know, the people who are like the speaker, yeah. And then like whoever was the admin could like promote people to speaker, and then I think everyone else was more of just like audience, and then they could like type to participate, and that's the only thing I've participated in. Yeah, I don't know if anyone else has, so if so, share some tips. I'm slightly nervous, but also like it's just Zoom, so hopefully.
Yeah. This will be my first kind of meetup to format like this too. I mean, a lot of big group Zoom meetings over the past 6 months, but first time I've done this exactly.
Yeah. It looks like someone has joined early. I guess one thing we'll probably want to figure out, and I'll leave this to the speakers to figure out what they want to do. Like, how should we do questions? So we can either have people type them in, and then do them at the end, or do you want to just like, if someone has a question, like they unmute and then ask?
What do you think? Any thoughts on that?
Oh, Manish, you're muted.
My experience with these big Zoom calls, especially with my 3 children, where I can see them on their online school, is unmuting and just jumping in can be a disaster.
Yeah.
Sure.
So we can have a couple things you can do, like notice if you go to the bottom of your control panel, there's a reactions thing.
Oh, yeah.
And so people can like clap or put a thumbs up. Like you can say, well, why don't you thumbs up? Like, see if I do this.
Okay.
Right. That you can say, okay, well, why don't you do that? That's one option for a question. I don't know how to get rid of it though.
It goes away after a few seconds on its own.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Okay. There we go. So you can say, oh, do that for a question. Or you can say, if you have a question, you can either type it into the chat window, and we'll save it till the end, or we can look at it. But the problem is that if people unmute, like you start to get all the noise and everything in there. I generally like questions during the presentation. It's better than waiting till the end. But my experience with the jump in with like, how many RSVPs are there?
Like 109 the last time I checked.
40, if 40 or 50 people show up, it's going to be chaos.
Yeah, so I agree. Let's do the chat and then we can take them at the end.
Yeah.
Okay. Cool. And then, hey Phil, we're just talking about the logistics of handling questions, and I think so far we think the best thing to do is just for people to type in their questions so they can, so like the speakers can just answer them at the end. If you're good with that.
Yeah, that works.
Would either of you want like a moderator to help read the questions so you can answer, or are you comfortable with going through the chat and answering them yourself?
I always need help, so.
Okay, yeah, no worries.
That works. I'll take help all day. So.
Okay, so I'll help with your questions, Phil.
Phil, is that
Okay, cool.
Philadelphia behind you? What city is that?
No, that's Atlanta.
Atlanta.
Yeah, I'm broadcasting from Atlanta. Yeah.
All right.
Hey Phil, I'm Zach with Aspenmesh. Nice to virtually meet you. These
Hey,
are
how you doing, Zach? Good to meet you as well.
good. Yeah, these are always weird meetings on Zoom the first time, aren't they?
That's true. Also, hi, I'm Rose. I'm also with AspenMesh. And then Manish, then if you would like a moderator person to help with your questions, I can do that.
Yeah, that would be great. I haven't done this before, so I don't know if it'll be helpful or not, right? It's my first Zoom format meetup like this. So.
Yeah. Okay. Is there anything else? Okay, I'm just going to make a list of things to announce at the very beginning. So the Bevy thing, and then Zach will mention the Grubhub thing. And then if we're going to have people type questions, well, actually, I'm just going to ask people to mute upon coming in. I think that's fair.
If you had admin privileges, you can actually just make that happen.
Yeah,
Oh,
I pinged Amy.
Are you not an admin, Karen?
No, because this came from CNCF. So Amy, who's like a PM for CNCF, granted me the link for this meetup Zoom account. So I just pinged her to see if she can give me the code to claim hosts because
Alright,
I
yeah.
think that would be
Hopefully
beneficial.
we're well behaved.
Yeah. If not, it's all recorded. So,
Yeah. There we go.
okay. And then, cool. And then Phil will be our first speaker. And I think only the host can like pin a video, right? Like as of right now, people just have to pin. Well, I guess the speaker will come up first.
Well, I think when Phil starts to share his screen, Phil, I assume you'll share your screen with the presentation, should kind of take over, and that'll be the main screen.
Okay, cool.
I'm gonna go settle my kids for 3 minutes so they're not loud the whole time, but I'll be right back.
All right. That's okay. And you're waiting for the host key that will bump us up to presenter,
Yeah.
I guess?
Well, I don't know that that will happen. It was more of just to like have rights to like mute people upon entry, and then I think either
Oh,
way,
okay,
like
I
you
see
should,
the share button. Okay.
yeah, you should still be able to do everything you need to.
Got it.
You want
Okay.
to try sharing your screen right now?
Yeah, that'll work. Let's see. Find it. I'm
Yep,
assuming I'm
yeah.
sharing something. Okay, you can see the navigating the service mesh.
Yep, that looks right.
Okay, all right, cool.
Yeah, the other downside of these Zoom formats is it's much harder to understand what the audience is seeing versus what you're seeing, you know? Whereas in person, it's pretty clear.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
What's the weather like out there?
Where, Colorado or California?
Oh, okay, you're in Cali, I guess. I guess for the.
Well, I'm in Colorado. Karen's in California.
Okay. Yeah, I know Karen's in
Yeah, I presume Zach and Rose are still out here in Colorado, right?
Yep.
We are, yeah. We haven't fled to another place like half our team has during this yet. We're staying.
Really?
Yeah, we have a lot of folks that a couple that just picked up and moved, and a couple that have been on like 5-month-long, VRBO stays at this point. So interesting.
So who's moved? So Neeraj moved to India. He's still part of the team, right?
Neeraj did not move to India. He was about to fly. Him and Pooja were leaving right as this all hit, and their flights all got canceled. So they're still here.
I thought they figured out how to move because I had lunch with Neeraj the day before he was supposed to fly out.
Oh, interesting. No,
And,
they're still in Boulder waiting to go.
Oh my God, I didn't realize that they're still here.
Yeah.
I should hit him up and see if he wants to get lunch or something.
Yeah, you should. I think he'd appreciate that. They're kind of living in their apartment, waiting to go back home. So yeah, I'm sure he'd like the distraction. Sean's been in Maine for about a month now, so yeah.
Okay.
Yep.
Real quick, I got the host keys. I can't find the little button to add it though. Does anyone? I just saw it earlier. Now I don't remember where I saw it. Let's see.
I feel like I need a fancy background image now.
This.
Guess I can do that.
Oops. Where are my choose virtual background options? Yeah, we debated like going up to Steamboat Springs or something, but we were optimistic that the kids would be back in school, and they're supposed to be next week. So that's actually good news. But I have a ton of friends in the Bay Area that were like, yep, okay, so we're camping out in, Basalt, which is outside of Aspen, or Steamboat Springs, or, some other resort town while we wait.
Yep. Yeah,
I
our
wonder-
director of Eng decided to move to New Mexico. Figured he'd move down there and see what happens. Move back to Colorado if he has to. It's
Who's your,
interesting.
who's your director of Eng?
It's actually our Brian Maloney. He's a fairly new guy we've hired in the last year.
Yeah, I don't know him.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's pretty interesting. I mean, I'm surprised now people get to live where they want to live as opposed to where work makes them live, you know?
Yes, it will be interesting to see the diaspora if this lasts long term for sure.
Well, I think what's going to be interesting is, you know, Facebook and Google have said 2021. I don't know what Microsoft's deal is, but I wonder what's going to happen when these companies start saying, okay, everybody has to come back into the office. Like, is everybody going to be out, like, trying to negotiate for work from home jobs, or, you know, I don't know.
It'll be interesting to see for sure. Yeah.
I also wonder when companies start having the branded backgrounds that they start handing out for the Zoom calls.
Oh wow, that's a familiar face. Hey Brian, how are you?
Not bad. How you doing?
Doing well. Good to see you again.
Yeah, thanks for hosting this giant online conference.
Yeah, we'll see how it goes. It should be fun.
Yeah, it's filling up here. This is good.
Okay, we'll give it a few more minutes.
Yeah, there's no traffic to contend with, so these should be fairly large meetings, I'm assuming.
So does anybody know how the video scaling works on Zoom? Do they have like nodes that compress all the videos into like thumbnail size? Seriously, like, I don't know how that works.
Yeah, no idea. I'd like
Yeah,
to
good
know the
question.
answer to that question
But
too.
at some point, receiving enough video streams will make demoing impossible, right?
Yeah.
All right, I'm gonna just start with a few announcements, and then I'll also put this in the chat for those of you that, or for the people who are gonna come later. Real quick, if you didn't already do this, CNCF is moving all of its like official cloud native and Kubernetes meetups to their platform. It's community.cncf.io. So on the back end, it's Bevy, if anyone's familiar with that. But this is going to be happening across the board. So I would encourage all of you to make your accounts there. I think for the next couple meetups with this group, we'll continue posting on Meetup, but just know that this transition is coming. Yeah, and then real quick, you all have been muted upon entry. If you have questions for the presenters, please type them into the chat window during their session, and we will read through the questions at the end and ask the speakers. And then Zach has some more information about your Grubhub coupons.
Yeah, thanks everyone for joining tonight. And I'm going to put a link to a Google form in the chat here. If you'll go sometime during the meeting tonight and just add your name and your email address, I will get those $20 Grubhub cards over to you via your email. I'll do it as soon as we're done here so I don't forget. Thanks.
And then if there's anyone new, maybe Zach, Rose, and I can introduce ourselves just so you'll probably see us more in the future. We are the organizers of the Kubernetes Colorado meetup. So I am a PM at Microsoft, and I'm actually based in San Francisco, but I've been running this meetup for a while now. And yeah, so Zach, do you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, thanks, Karen. I'm Zach Jory. I'm the marketing lead at Aspen Mesh. We're a little Istio startup based in downtown Boulder. Have been helping Karen run the meetup for a while in downtown Boulder, and you know, glad that we are now a global meetup. So thanks everyone for coming.
Yep, and hi everybody, I'm Rose. You'll also see me around these meetups from time to time. I am the content marketing lead also at Aspen Mesh based out of Boulder, and really excited to transition here into this virtual meetup so we can continue to have these. Thanks for coming.
Cool. So maybe we can get started. Our first speaker for the night is Philip Gibson. He works at Microsoft, and he will be talking to us about navigating the service mesh ecosystem.
Awesome. Thank you, Karen. Let me go ahead and share out my presentation. And just please let me know if you're seeing that. Okay, good. Okay. All right. Well, hey, I'm happy to be here. As Karen mentioned, I'm Phil Gibson. I'm a senior PM here at Microsoft on our Azure Upstream team. So our team is kind of tasked with looking at functional gaps out in the open source community and building projects that we hope people will eventually contribute to. And so we'll be talking about navigating the service mesh. This is a pretty hot topic. This is our agenda. So we'll talk about the service mesh. What is it? I'm assuming most people here may be already familiar with it, but I created some cute slides. So we'll go through it and hopefully that hits home. Then we'll talk about the service mesh interface specification. So this kind of gets a little lost in translation as far as what it does, what's its purpose. So we'll kind of dig in on that. And then we'll introduce everyone here to OSM if they've not seen it. So that's the Microsoft Service Mesh that we open sourced about maybe a month and a half ago. And so we'll go through its principles, its features. I got a recorded demo. So we'll go through that, show it off, and then we will end with Q&A. Okay. All right, so the need for service mesh, we get this question all the time, and from customers is, hey, do I need this? Do I not? And I think the most honest and popular answer is it depends, right? That's like the classic answer. But if you kind of look at what you're probably doing today without a service mesh is, you probably have this classic 3-tier model, your front end, middle tier, and back end. And if you wanted to secure the communications between those tiers of nodes, you're probably using a CA, a certificate authority. And this is probably just a refresher for those that know it, but your CA is going to have its public-private key, and then you're going to issue or you're going to create public-private keys for all of your nodes of your applications. And then even before we want communication to start, we'll have your CA go ahead and sign those certs out, and then everyone's happy, so that communication happens. So again, this has been normal stuff for a long time in data centers. And so the problem we run into is that, if you start looking at cloud architectures or what we call cloud native architectures, where you're actually, scaling parts of your tiers of your applications to meet, service needs or end users needs, then you get into this kind of, what I like to say is like a whack-a-mole type of setup, right? So, when you're scaling up and down, you have these kind of ephemeral nodes that are coming up online, bouncing offline, and you got to keep up with all the certificates for those nodes and ensure that you're having, secure communication between your application. And then finally, you may not even have visibility. These are probably separate systems, and you don't really have like all of view into all those activities. And so that just makes it tough. I mean, if you have a pretty strong process, this at scale is really tough to kind of keep up with. So if we kind of translate that over into, what we call like a more cloud native environment. So again, you have your 3-tier, and if you deploy that in Kubernetes, these tiers will become pods. And if you did nothing and deployed your application, let's say you refactored it, got it into Kubernetes, by default, they'll just talk to each other, right? There's nothing securing that traffic. If they can route to each other and resolve each other, that traffic will just happen. And that's really not what you want, right? And so this is where the service mesh comes in. So we actually take the activities of your CA and kind of build that into what we call a service mesh control plane. And that service mesh control plane will then inject sidecar proxies into your application pod. And then, again, going back to what the CA was doing in the classic design is now your service mesh control plane is now issuing tickets out to these sidecar proxy containers that are accompanying your application. And that's where we get secure communication. So this definitely offloads a lot of work that if you were, running SDKs in your application to do so, you can now offload that and have that as a function of the sidecar, which will then route that traffic again between pod to pod in a secure manner. And another benefit that we get from the service mesh is whenever you want to have a new policy deployed out, again, you got this kind of central mechanism from the control plane where you can go ahead and deploy those policies out. And let's say, hey, we just want to stop all the traffic between these tiers for whatever reason. And that's easily done. And we got pretty much a good set of observability into the mesh to see what configs that you have, what metrics, and the health. And so that's really kind of the value prop of what the service mesh can bring to your environment. Now, if we look at the service mesh landscape, we got a lot of players, right? I just threw some, some images up here. I'm probably missing 5 to 10, so don't get upset if you represent a company. Just ping me and I'll ensure that I add yours to this. But the key thing here is, again, the space is getting very popular. Some people will say crowded. And everyone is kind of doing their own implementation of a service mesh. So they core functionality is there pretty much across everyone, but the way that they execute on things is done differently between each mesh. And so now we have the scenario. Let's say you have an organization, you're looking at service meshes, right? So you got Team A, they love Kubernetes and they've been looking into service meshes and they came up and said, hey, you know what? Service mesh A works for us. It has all features and functionalities. We love it. And then they start looking at their tooling and then they get really savvy. So they start, creating their workflows and deploying out to their cluster and voila, they have their services, everyone's talking, completely secure. So no problems with Team A. And then you have Team B comes along and they say, yeah, we got a cluster too. And in our research, we liked what Service Mesh B was doing, because of XYZ. This is more important for our applications. And then they start looking at their tooling too. And then they say, you know what, let's be smart about this, right? So we know Team A down the hall is doing some things. Let's go ahead and chat with them, see what they're doing from a tooling perspective. So they go chat with Team A. And then Team A says, hey, yeah, this is what we do. We love it. And they say, hey, here's our artifacts. Take them, have at it, and do whatever you want to do. And then Team B takes those artifacts and they realize that, hey, because they're using Service Mesh B, all the APIs and everything is not working for them, right? So true that they have the logic, but it's going to be basically ground up right for what they need to do as far as from a tooling perspective. And then in addition to that, service meshes do have provider plugins. So let's say Team A looks at some plugin for a service mesh A. They say, hey, this is great. It extends, maybe it's a CNI type of thing or et cetera. And then they go ahead and they deploy this into their cluster. They get it going. And then they come back to their tooling. And then they deploy their tooling and they find out, hey, the tooling has to be redone. It can't really communicate with that service mesh provider. And so that's another issue that you may have. And so those common issues led us to the creation of what we call the SMI spec, or the service mesh interface. And so this was announced back in May 2019. And really, just at a high level, I won't get into it. You can kind of read the bullets, but this was to create a common standard that can be implemented by a variety of providers. The goal is to have a portable set of APIs, such as building an abstraction layer on top of the service meshes that are out there. And so those are the goals. And what's not the goals of the SMI project is for SMI to become a service mesh itself. So that's not the goal. And we're not really trying to restrict service meshes that are out there. What we want them to do is, if they have APIs outside of the spec, then we would love to work with them and see if we can get those APIs into the SMI spec so that, maybe even other service meshes can use those as well. So, in my kind of experience talking with customers, SMI is still kind of confusing. So what I like to do is I take it back to a couple of other things that we're already doing in Kubernetes. And I'll use an example of like CRI, right? So the container runtime interface. So, if you can remember a while ago, there was basically two container runtimes, there was Docker and it was Rocket. And the reason that the kubelet was able to talk to both of these runtimes is because, if you're familiar with this, those APIs, that code base was actually inside the kubelet, right? So it was compiled as part of the kubelet binary. And then what ended up happening was new companies came around, and new concepts of containers came around, and we got these additional runtimes. And then it became an issue where we said, okay, now we need those additional runtimes actually compiled back into kubelet. And the SIG started looking at this and said, you know what, this is going to be chaos, right? If every new runtime comes around and we have to recompile kubelet, we're going to have issues. And so that was the birth of CRI, which was a gRPC kind of shim that said, hey, kubelet talks to the CRI, and the CRI is the one that's actually talking back out to container runtimes. And so again, this concept of abstraction is not new. It exists there. It exists with the CRI. It exists with CSI and CNI. And so, again, I like to equate SMI with these other initiatives that we already see in the Kubernetes community. So why does the ecosystem need SMI? Again, I just want to kind of touch base back on what we talked about previously. Again, we want to be provider agnostic. So again, if you have, heterogeneous environment, you can have a very common set of tooling that can talk to or interact with any service mesh or the providers that go along with it. Again, being Kubernetes native, that's a given. We want to make sure that we're doing things by the model of Kubernetes, and then also being extensible. So again, providing a way for providers to write their APIs and interface with the spec fairly easy. So then, if we look at what that previous environment would be if they are using SMI or working with vendors that have SMI implemented. Just right off the bat, what they can do is they can actually consolidate a lot of their tooling. It may not be the same pipelines, et cetera, but the API model should be fairly easy and reusable for both teams or any other team. And so, so we get that happening, and then SMI will translate those APIs out, and then we'll get things being deployed in cluster A and B with service mesh A and B. And then also the other cool thing, again, that I want to touch on is, SMI providers that are out there, right? So we are talking with both Knative and the people at Weaveworks looking at Flagger, and we have those plugins to where, again, if customer needs those plugins, they get them implemented in a cluster. no issues, and you don't have this like massive rewrite or massive activities with your tooling, and everything should just work. So what APIs are included with the SMI spec? You know, when you really look at it, and just, you know, I've been around this for some time. You know, you're going to get traffic access control, your traffic specs, your traffic split, and your traffic metrics. And this is almost like the 80-20 rule. Like what we see people actually look for service meshes to do. This is probably 80% of all the activities that you're ever going to want. And so that's what makes SMI really approachable to a lot of customers. And we're in partnership with a lot of people. You know, Aspen Mesh being one. I know they're on the call. So it's a growing ecosystem and a growing partnership as well. And so that's SMI. You know, if you want to kind of understand this in more detail or be a part of the community, I'll share these links out, or I'll share the deck out with the host here. So we do have bi-weekly calls. There's a lot of content out on the smi-spec.io page. And so there's just a lot of activity going on. All right, so I'm doing good on time, just want to check. So now let's introduce those that don't know to Open Service Mesh. And my screen go the wrong way. Okay, there we go. All right, so Open Service Mesh, this is a lightweight, extensible cloud native service mesh. Again, we've taken a very simple approach with how we wanted to have this implemented by, you know, operators, you know, and ultimately the end user. And again, we're using the Envoy project as our sidecar. So again, we get to take advantage of all the goodness that's happening in the Envoy project. And I don't have the date here, but I think specifically we open sourced this, I think it was August 5th. So again, just a little over a month and a half ago, I'm assuming. And its core principles, again, you're going to hear me kind of keep harping on like simple and easy, because we really kind of approach this with the operator in mind. You know, a lot of the feedback from some of the other service meshes, not that they weren't capable, but you know, you have to nearly be, I wouldn't say rocket science, but you know, have a fairly high degree of skill to kind of implement it and get them going the way you want it to. So again, our principles is let's keep it simple, let's keep it effortless, let's keep kind of the interaction painless to troubleshoot and very easy to configure. And so the features that you can get with the current release is obviously traffic shifting, so being able to shift traffic from one service to another. Obviously MTLS, I think that's probably the biggest thing that customers are asking for, is to be able to secure communications between their applications, being able to control access, debug and monitor, certificate management, the automated sidecar injection into your application pods. And then this last bullet, this one is actually pretty important that I want to touch on is, you know, even though we've made this, well, I would say super simple for, you know, operators to approach, because we're using the Envoy proxy, we've made it flexible. So in those, you know, the 20% exotic type of scenarios that you may need to have direct XDS access to do things, we do allow you to do that. You know, so it's not that we're shielding you from the APIs of Envoy. If you absolutely need to do something, we do allow you to actually go into raw APIs and then touch the Envoy proxy if need be. And the ecosystem for OSM, it is growing. We got probably more customers not listed here, but it is a growing ecosystem. And really, I'll sum up OSM as, you know, it's Microsoft realization of a purely SMI spec service mesh. And so again, our goal is to really showcase what SMI can do and why it's good for the community. And we think that OSM kind of is a good model to do so. Okay, so with that, we are going to do a demo. Full transparency, this demo is recorded. I was having some connectivity issues, so I actually recorded the demo. And the good thing about that is this demo is only about maybe 14 minutes. I think I got enough time to do that. So it stops me from kind of doing a lot of sidebar stuff here. So with this demo, what you'll see here is we are at the Open Service Mesh page. So it's openservicemesh.io. And actually, before we get into the demo, we'll go over here to the blog link here. And I just want to let everyone know, if you have not seen the tweets or activities, that OSM has been accepted as a CNCF sandbox project. So we're pretty excited about that and looking forward to more contributors from the community and more feedback from people using it. So hopefully, you know, people on this call would love to get involved too. So we'll go back over to our GitHub link. And here we'll go ahead and kick off the demo. We'll scroll down. So our latest release is 0.3.0. And then we'll scroll down to our table of contents. And inside our table of contents, we have a demos link. We'll go ahead and click that. And we do have two demos. We have an automated demo. So if you just wanted to really just start playing with OSM, you're not too worried about what's under the covers, do automated. But we're going to go through the manual demo here, so we can just, I can give you some context of what's happening as we spin this up. What this demo is going to do, I'm going to scroll down here and just kind of show you. So we got a test application. It's called Bookstore. There's 3 or 4 services: Book Buyer, Book Thief, 2 versions of the Bookstore, and then the Book Warehouse where it's fetching books from. So we're going to show you how we have all those services talk to each other and show you how we secure them and authorize traffic. We got our prerequisites. That should be pretty common stuff. And we'll go ahead and start the install. So I have a very just a generic cluster. There's nothing running in it. And we'll go ahead and just make sure we got the correct context. And I got a Open Service Mesh demo cluster. And I'll just do an enumeration here on the namespaces. So it's pretty bare. And then what we'll do is I already have the OSM binary. I got that in my path, and we'll just go ahead and run the OSM install command. And that's it. So that installed the control plane and all of its components. And we'll just do a git pods and just kind of look at what actually got deployed. So beyond the pods, I mean, there are some CRDs, but we got our controller, we got our Grafana and Prometheus pods, as well as Zipkin. Zipkin we actually have removed, so I won't go too deep in that. But another thing I'm going to show you is, let's just look at the API resources and grep it with SMI, and you'll see that we have pretty much our SMI specs already defined here. And so now we'll go and actually deploy the Bookstore application. We'll go ahead and create some namespaces here. So we just got a bash for loop. We'll create namespaces for the Bookstore, Book Buyer, Book Thief, and the Book Warehouse. And I'm using a older binary that doesn't have this enable sidecar injection, so that's why I don't grab that parameter. But essentially what we're doing here is we're onboarding the namespace to OSM, meaning that whenever you deploy a pod to it, we're automatically going to annotate it and it'll get the sidecar injection. So you actually don't have to modify your pod specs to do so. And then we will now deploy out the Bookstore application. Okay, so that's been deployed. And let's just clear that screen. And I think we're just going to go and take a look at the pods in the bookstore namespace. And I think we'll just see the bookstore V1 pod there running. So we're good. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to copy that pod. We'll do a describe on it just real quick. And this is just kind of a, nothing up your sleeve type of thing. So we're going to describe this pod, and then we'll look at the spec on it, and you'll actually see the Envoy proxy injection there. Oh, I had my nouns wrong, so we will flip pod in front of the actual pod. Okay, so here's the spec for the pod. We'll scroll up and you'll notice we have our container, our Envoy container. And again, this was automatically injected, and our main container here, which is the bookstore container. So now that we have that deployed, let's go ahead and just pull up the UIs for all of those apps that are running in the cluster. Since this is all internal, we do have a way that you'll do a port forwarding script. And so I already have that configured, so I'll just execute this in a separate terminal session so I can keep doing demo functions in the other one. And this will just, again, create a port forward to all of our UIs here. And we'll go ahead and bring those into the browser. So this is the book buyer. And you'll notice all the counts are going to be 0. And the reason is because even though we have them deployed, we don't have the access policies for them to actually talk to each other. And that was our bookstore. Bookstore V2, we don't have that deployed. We will deploy Bookstore V2 once we get into the traffic split demo. So we'll come back, and this is our book thief. And so now what we're going to do is we're going to open up access for the book buyer to speak to the Bookstore V1 service. We'll take a look at the traffic target spec here. You'll see that obviously there is none, so we need a traffic target to actually enable that communication. And we will grab that manifest here. Okay, so now we've updated and we've deployed out a traffic target along with an HTTP route group. And you'll see now that we have the Bookstore V1 traffic target. I'll do a describe here so you can actually see what the spec looks like. And so what you'll see is we have a destination, which is our Bookstore V1. We have our HTTP route group. That's part of an extra layer of a control of what type of HTTP traffic you want to come across, as well as the sources. So this is allowing the book buyer to now speak to our Bookstore V1 service. And so this is kind of the first step. And then what we're going to do is we're going to just describe this HTTP route group. And we'll show you the actual authorized HTTP traffic that we're allowing too. So again, this is another layer of security to where you can actually say, not only am I authorizing those 2 endpoints from talking, I want to actually authorize the type of traffic in the HTTP headers. And that's what you see here. Okay, so if we go back, we can now see the book buyer is now buying books out of the bookstore. We see the bookstore is now selling books, so all that's incrementing. And we don't see the book thief because we've only authorized the book buyer to talk to the Bookstore V1 service. So let's go ahead and enable the book thief to start stealing some books out of the bookstore. And you'll just notice here that the book thief, you look at that spec, it's just commented out. So we're just going to go into this YAML file and uncomment out the book thief as a source. And you'll see again, under sources, it's commented out. Book buyers is not, it's allowed to chat with the bookstore V1 service. So let's go ahead and comment out the book thief. And then we will save this out. And then we will apply this updated YAML. Okay, so that's been updated. It takes just a second for that policy to take effect. And then I think I'm just going back to show you actual targets here. So now that you'll see the book thief is now part of the sources that can now talk back to the bookstore V1 service. So let's go to the book thief browser tab here, and we may just have to give it just a second. And there we go. Okay, so now book thief is now part of the mesh. It's been authorized, and it is now able to steal books from the bookstore. Okay, so that's all the traffic access type of demo there. So now what we're going to do is we're actually going to do traffic split. So we're going to deploy out the bookstore V2 service. And what I have to do here is let's go ahead and clear this. And look at the traffic split spec. And so we'll just describe this bookstore split spec. And what you see here is in the back ends of the spec, we just have the one service for bookstore V1, and it's weighted 100%. So all the traffic is going to it. So let's go ahead and deploy out the bookstore V2 service. We'll just copy that into our terminal and run it. And so that's deploying out the bookstore V2. And then if you're going to do this, oops, I have a copy on this. If you're going to do this at home, what you'll have to do is once we deploy the bookstore V2, we actually have to stop the port forwarding so that, and just rerun this so that we can pick up that latest port for the bookstore V2 service. Okay, so we have our book buyer and we still have books being sold and stolen. And now we're going to go to the bookstore V2 endpoint. And you see that that application is up and running, but it's not selling books because, again, the traffic split has the spec weighted 100% to bookstore V2. We're now going to go change that. And we're going to update that traffic split. And we're just going to basically swing it all the way back over to V2. So we're going to have 0 for bookstore, the V1 version, and we'll do 100% over to bookstore V2. And so this is essentially the concept of, you know, how you would do your A/B testing, Canary. Again, we're working with integration with Flagger to kind of automate and do maybe a trickle up type of splitting to where you don't have to actually do this manually. Flagger will actually take care of that. So if we describe our traffic split, you'll see that we now showing that all the way over to bookstore V2. Our book buyer is still buying books. And we see our book thief is still stealing books. And we should now see no more books being sold by bookstore V1. So it's stuck at 512. And then now we see that since that traffic has been shifted over to bookstore V2, it is now the one that is accessing the warehouse to sell books. And so that's pretty much some of the main stuff. What I'm going to do here, just at the very end, let's just go ahead and stop this port forwarding and just show you the built-in OSM dashboard that we've built using Grafana and using the Prometheus scrapes. And when you run the OSM dashboard, that creates a port forwarding on port localhost 3000. And if you're following the demo, it's just admin to get into your Grafana site. And change the password, it's the same. And then once you're in your Grafana site, you can just go up to the home link here. And then what we've done is we have some out of the box charts or graphs, whatever they call them. One specifically for the control plane, the other for the data plane. And you can click into, I think this was the services. And then into the data plane, we'll click into the pods to service metrics. And again, so we're scraping from Prometheus, and we're actually building the views here from the actual SMI metrics API. So it's very simple for us to actually build these out. And that is it. That brings us to the end of our demo. Hopefully I'm under time here. And again, I'll just go back to the Open Service Mesh IO page. So if you are interested in getting involved, please go here and you'll see some of the community information. And you can also reach out to myself or Karen and we can get you hooked up.
Cool. Thanks so much, Phil. There are a few minutes, so maybe what we can do is go through a question or two, and then maybe after, maybe you can respond in chat, or maybe drop like your handle on Slack to the group where people can continue asking questions if you're good at that.
Yeah,
okay.
Yeah, that works.
Cool.
You want me to go stop sharing, or?
You can just leave that on. So let's go with the first question that was asked.
Cool.
This is Austin. Austin asked, when you have a persistent application like a database or heavy web app in a container, what overhead is there for those apps or microservices, which speaks to databases or other containers, i.e. native apps that now have a sidecar, but before using something like Istio that wasn't there?
Yeah, it's a good question. Yeah, I mean, anytime you are going to have kind of like the sidecar pattern, you are obviously going to be taking resources from the cluster. The Envoy proxy is pretty lightweight. So it's not been my experience from customers that said that they see kind of degradation in their applications. It's especially if you're using it for HTTP traffic. Now, you mentioned like heavy databases, right? So you're looking at ports like SQL 1433, et cetera. I don't know if, depending on the traffic, you could have some bottleneck depending on how much you're pumping data through. I'll be honest, I don't know, unless we really do some stress testing, I'm not sure if the proxy will actually be in hindrance, but it's just been my experience with Istio, Linkerd, like pretty much all the popular ones, that we don't tend to see a complaint about the traffic being proxied through the sidecar.
So Austin is responding in the chat and he said, I guess something heavy like streaming, we're thinking NoSQL streams, etc. And then would network performance be impacted with more ports as well as between the app and the database?
Yeah, I mean, I don't have them on hand, but I mean, there's several large applications. I mean, there's a lot of customers out there with large deployments of Istio, Linkerd, console, etc. Again, I don't know like the real numbers behind it, but the Envoy proxy, I mean, if you think of it, it's essentially a router. And so when I say that it's going to take up resource utilization, obviously it's taken memory and everything else from Kubernetes itself, right? So you do have to plan for that, and then maybe in your application pod specs, you go ahead and put your request limits the right way, so you can ensure that your cluster can deliver on resourcing. But yeah, it unless you got something pretty major, again, the Envoy proxy is pretty performant, and it's just not been something I see in the blogosphere where people are saying that any Envoy proxy is kind of limiting their applications.
Great. Okay, so we're at time. Do you want to drop your handle on Slack or the Kubernetes Slack into the chat, and then maybe you can go from there. And then I will hand it off to Rose to introduce our next speaker. Thank you, Phil.
All right.
Thanks, everyone.
Sorry, Phil. Thank you. Overlap there. That always happens somewhere. All right. So our next speaker, we've got Manish Vakarajani. I hope I said that right. From Unbounded Systems, and he is going to talk to us today about a developer-first approach to Kubernetes. I'll hand it over to you.
Okay, great. Let's see, why doesn't this want to go to my correct desktop? There we go. Okay, great. Thanks for the introduction. Let me pull up some slides here. I'm going to try and do this talk a little bit differently in that I'm going to try to have very few slides and a lot more demo in here. So what I'm going to talk about today, well, first, let's make sure you can all see my screen. So problem with having too many windows open is you can no longer see the Zoom call. Oh, that's excellent. There we go. Okay, great. So let me share my screen here and we'll get started. Share screen 2. Share. Okay. And let's pull up the PowerPoint. Great. So can everybody see my screen?
Yep.
Thumbs up. Great. Okay. So what I want to talk today about is a developer-first approach to Kubernetes. And so when I think about a developer-first approach, to me, it's all about developer experience. And so Mark and I started Unbounded Systems in order to really build the best possible developer experience for modern cloud-based applications, right? And one of the first things that we realized as we started doing our homework and figuring out what we need to build to really make a world-class developer experience is that we didn't even understand what a good developer experience looks like. And that's because, in my opinion, because I have a very strong infrastructure background. The last company that we built was a networking company, so software-based networking company. And so in a lot of ways, as a developer, my persona is definitely on the left side of this slide, right? And I figured based on the topics that are covered at this meetup, me being at the meetup previously and just seeing some familiar faces in the topic sheet, I think in the video chats, I think a lot of people identify with the left column here. And so, this infrastructure engineering, DevOps engineering, you run a Kubernetes cluster, and all of this stuff is really cool. Like I love Kubernetes and Docker and Terraform and Go and all of these things. I think they're really very cool technologies. But what we figured out is that there's this entirely different world of developers out there that I'm going to call, in this talk, I'm going to call them application developers. Now, these guys, it's not to say that what we do with Kubernetes is not important to the companies that we work for, but application developers are the people where the rubber really hits the road, right? So they actually develop the software that makes the money for the business. They're developing the web pages or the web interfaces or the phone applications that customers actually interact with, or they're building the software that the people who deliver the service that the company makes interact with on a day-to-day basis. And they work with a completely different set of technologies. So they work with things like React and GraphQL, Node.js and JavaScript. And until working on this company, I didn't really realize how rich that ecosystem was and actually how good the developer experience is for those folks if they're using certain kind of services. So what I want to start by doing today is I want to talk about, I want to just show you what a state-of-the-art developer experience looks like with some of the modern tools on the right side, on the right column here. And so to do that, I'm going to leave the slide deck here and I'm going to switch to my workstation here. So once again, just give me a thumbs up, assuming if you can read that terminal reasonably well. Okay, great. So I'm going to use, actually, let me flip back to the slides real quick here. So I'm going to use a few different tools here. I'm going to be using JavaScript. Why am I going to be using JavaScript? Well, because it is the most popular language for software development. And if you're going to deal with code that runs in a web browser at any point, you're going to run into some JavaScript, whether you like it or not. And then I'm going to use a tool called Gatsby, which is designed to build static websites, and then a service called Vercel, used to be called Zeet. For these two, I could have picked different services. There's a whole bunch of these. There's like Next.js that I could have picked, and I could have picked Netlify instead. And then there's different cloud offerings from different vendors that kind of do similar types of things. Here I'm going to use Gatsby and Vercel because I think they demo pretty well some of the things that I want to talk about. And so, so if you are a front-end developer and you're trying to deploy some services with Gatsby, what does this look like? So Gatsby has this concept of starters. So if I'm going to start a new project, I just do Gatsby new, and then I just type in the name of my directory because I'm going to use the default starter here. So I'm going to say Gatsby new, and I'm going to create a directory called Gatsby demo. And what Gatsby is basically going to do here is it's going to create my directory. It's going to populate it with all the stuff that's actually necessary to run Gatsby and start off my software development effort, right? And so while it's doing that, we can take a quick look over here. If you look, there's Gatsby starters. There's an entire starter library for Gatsby. And so they have like 460 different starters that you can get. So you can pick a starter that's as close to the application you're trying to build. And it's all community-based. So, you know, you can submit your own starter or do whatever you want there. And so you can start with something that's as close to your application as you want and start writing code. Now, the interesting thing here is now it even tells me what I need to do next. And so I'm just going to do that. I'm going to cd to Gatsby demo, and I'm going to run Gatsby develop. Okay, and so when I do this, I'm essentially going to get a full local development environment up and running. And so you'll see very quickly here in less than a minute, I have a full local dev loop workflow building. So I can go here and I can just say open link, and it's going to pull this link up, and I get the site that's built in the default starter. And then I can start editing code. When I edit the code, it will hot reload the code, so I don't even have to rebuild. It'll hot reload the code and update the browser, and I'm good to go. I'm now writing code and developing. So now that is what happens with that developer experience in terms of the local development loop. So what about actually getting something that other people can see? So I'm going to use Vercel for this. This is pretty easy. They have a product called Now, and I'm just going to run Now. And it says, hey, do you want me to set up and deploy this Gatsby demo directory? So I'm going to say yes. It's going to say, what scope do you want to deploy to? So I'm actually already logged in, so I'm going to just use my personal scope here. Do you want to link to an existing project? No, although it will try to auto-detect if it can. And then it's going to say, what do you want to name the project? So find Gatsby demo. I'm going to say my code's in the current directory. So it sets up the project, and it says, hey, I detected that the way you build this is this, and the way you run the development server is this other thing. Do you want to override these settings? And my answer to that is no, I do not. And so what's going to happen very quickly is it's actually going to go and deploy this on Vercel. So if I go over back to my browser here, and I click on the Vercel page here, what I'll see is I have my Gatsby demo project, and I have a URL that I can click. So I can click that URL. It's going to show me the status of the deployment. I can see all my build logs for how things had built, and I can even visit the site. And so now I see that same site here on a public URL. So I now have a public URL deployed and completed. So you say, okay, well, that's all good, well and good, but for a production workflow, I'm going to need to have CI and CD and do all of this stuff. Well, that's also really pretty easy. So I'm going to go over to GitHub here, and I'm going to create a new repository. And I'm going to call it Gatsby demo. Create the repository. Now you'll notice even GitHub tells me exactly what commands to run to use my existing repository here. In any case, I'm not going to do that quite yet. I'm going to go back to the Vercel, and notice they have a very nice link here that just says Git integration. So I'm going to click Git integration here, and I'm going to say Gatsby demo, and I'm going to save that Git integration in here. Okay. And so it says, okay, the Git integration has been successful. So all I have to do now, and it tells me nicely here, is that I just had to push to a branch. And so I'm going to do that. So I'm going to go back here, and I'm going to paste those commands into my terminal. I'm going to push over to master branch, and I'm going to now come back here to Vercel, and we should see that it's starting to deploy, right? So now we can see there's an upcoming deploy that's coming up. We're building, it's saying it's an initial commit from this Git repository. So it's going to do that build, right? We can again look at it. We can look at the build logs, see the build logs in progress, see what it's doing, right? And so we can see it's building. And when it's done, I will have a visit link right here, and I'll be able to visit that site. So now, in less than, I think, 10 minutes, I now have a development environment with a development workflow and a production environment with a full CI/CD pipeline in less than 10 minutes, right? And so now I can click visit, and again, I get that same demo site. Okay, so this, so when we talk about developer experience for Kubernetes, or for any other cloud system, for example, this, in my opinion, is kind of the standard that we have to rise to, which is this really seamless, very simple experience. Now, the problem is with this, of course, is that there are some sacrifices we make to get this experience. So first and foremost, this was a front-end only site. There was no back-end code to this. Now, both Netlify and Vercel actually do give you the ability to deploy some back-end code. It's a function as a service thing, but it's very, very limited. And so I really don't have very much control over how things get deployed and what happens. So all that great stuff that Phil talked about in terms of security and implementing security policy and all that stuff, you have zero control or visibility into that, right? And really, and when it comes to visibility and debuggability of things that are happening off of your local workstation, it's really pretty poor. So as an example, the open source project that we're building called Adapt, which I'll talk about in a moment, is hosted on Netlify. And so on Netlify, this has all the docs and everything to how the system works and all the reference docs and everything. There's about a 3-second page load time due to some network effects here. I have no idea what they are. Clearly, you know, the last company we built was a networking company. We had the expertise to fix it if we could only see what was going on. Maybe if I upgrade to their top CDN tier, then it'll fix it. Who knows? The other problem that we have with this thing is, you know, because we have a lot of API reference stuff in here, sometimes thousands of web pages are updated in a single commit. Well, it takes 20 or 30 minutes plus to update those things, and that's not ideal. So Netlify does this cool thing where when I make a pull request, it will actually pre-build all the static stuff so that the code reviewer can actually see it before and interact with the GUI before they actually make their review comments or approve the merge request or the pull request. Well, it's now going to take 30 minutes every time I make an update. That's actually kind of crappy. It's not great. Again, I have no ability to fix this without any cooperation from Netlify. So I'm completely at the mercy of the vendor. So what we really want to try and do, and I think what we should be trying to do as a community in general, is move towards a developer experience that kind of replicates this really nice developer experience, but still retains the visibility, customizability, debuggability, and all the great stuff that we get when we roll our own using Kubernetes or whatever other services. And so our one piece of that puzzle is actually how to start your project and how to deploy it. And so that's what Adapt.js is all about. And so we're going to take a look at that here in a moment. But the basic goal, like I said, is to replicate that really simple experience of the JavaScript ecosystem. In under 10, 15 minutes, I basically get an end-to-end workflow that I can use, but it is customizable if you need it to be customizable using reusable components from a community of people who are contributing to the platform, okay? And we want to do it in a way that's accessible to developers. So the last thing that you want is, oh, it's really easy, but as soon as you need to customize something, well, okay, well, you better understand what Kubernetes deployments are, daemon sets are, stateful sets are. You better understand Helm charts, and all of the other stuff that goes, service mesh, and all of the other stuff that goes along with Kubernetes. You really want to make it so that when you peel back a layer, it's just a little bit more complexity, and they can tweak the thing they need to tweak. But you also want to make it possible to tweak all the way down to the low level if that's what you want to do. And finally, we want to make it work for the full development cycle. And so that means that we want it to work for local development. We want it to work for the team level, for staging, production, and we want to be able to do all of the cool state-of-the-art stuff like Canary deploys and all of that type of thing. So let's take a look at how this thing works. All right, so I'm going to get out of this Gatsby demo here, and I'm going to create a new project. Now, Adapt has the same concept of starters that Gatsby does, but because it deals with both front end and back end and much more flexibly, we don't have a default starter. So I'm going to start with one that is the Hello React Node Postgres starter, which is a Hello World application with a React.js front end. So React.js is a very popular front end web framework. It's in the top 2, and I think it's still the top web development framework. We're going to have a Node.js backend with a Postgres database that this is going to deploy, and I'm going to do this in a directory called my app. So, so you can see it's downloaded and created the starter project, and so I can go in here and I can fire up my editor, and I can see the different pieces, right? So I have some standard backend code here. It's very simple Node.js, just going to reply with hello world. I have front end code here. And this is a React.js app. It's been created with Create React App, which is exactly the tool that's very popular out there to use. And so, you know, it renders this app component. I can look at that app component, you know, and see that it just is going to print hello world to the screen, and I can go. So if I go over into the deploy directory, I can then go here and just say adapt run. And I'm going to run the default configuration, so I don't have to send, and I can give it a deploy ID. So I'm going to give it a deploy ID of, let's call it local. Okay. And so what this is going to do is it's going to look at the configuration that's here, and it's going to decide how to actually deploy the local environment. So the local dev environment. So while it's doing that, let's take a look at what that specification looks like. So if I go over here into deploy, index.tsx here, so this is just a JavaScript, looks like a JavaScript project. And again, why JavaScript? It's because the language that most developers know, at least in the space of full stack and front end type developers. And if you look at this, this looks, if you're familiar with React, looks exactly like a React app. The difference is that instead of deploying things like P elements or divs or buttons and so on, I'm actually deploying infrastructure. And so here I've got a component called app, and it consists of a group which has a URL router, a React app front end, a Node.js service, and a Postgres database. And notice I just point each of these to where the source code is, and those components figure out on their own how to build and deploy and all of this stuff. And each of these components can be fairly small, right? 50 lines of JavaScript, where it understands all the logic of how to pull those, how to and how to instantiate another set of components that'll do the Docker build and all the other stuff underneath the hood. Now, the different thing here is that we have these different stacks. And so I use the default stack, which deploys using this laptop style. And so that laptop style, if we come back here, just deployed some Docker images, no Kubernetes involved. It's just straight Docker images. So if I do Docker PS, I can see those things running here. And I can connect over, if I open up my browser, come on. Yeah, there we go. If I come over here, I can connect now, it's on localhost 8080. So I can just change this over. And boom, I've got my Hello World app running here, right? So just like we expect. We're working on getting hot code reload and some of those other really cool features working as well, because we want to make that development experience on par. So now, what I'm going to do, because in the interest of time, I'm not going to write all the code for an app. So I'm going to update our code base here to turn this into a little movie database search application. And so you can see I've added a bunch of front-end code here to render the movie search dialog and do all the work to the back end. I've updated the back end to actually be able to look up in the database. And then I've just added some test data that's going to be loaded into the test environment. Now, all I have to do to deploy that, I could do adapt, update, local, and it would update those in my local development environment. Now, in the interest of time, I'm not going to do that. What I'm going to do instead is I'm going to say adapt run, and I'm going to run the K8s test environment. And I'm going to give this a deploy ID of test. I'm going to run this. And so what this is going to do is it's going to look at this deployment, and instead of using this laptop style here, it's going to use the K8s test style. So while it's doing that deployment, let's take a look at what's involved in these style sheets. So you can see these style sheets are just opened up from a file in the local directory called styles. So let's go to the definition there. Okay, and you can see that we can do all sorts of cool things with the style sheets that customize how this thing deploys to various different environments. So in this example, I've said, look, regardless of what you do, whenever you see an HTTP server object, actually build an Nginx HTTP server, right? And this Nginx HTTP server is just a component, again, that comes from this Nginx library. You can write your own components. You make this be a Kubernetes ingress. You can do whatever you need to do to make that work. Anytime you see a URL router, build an Nginx URL router instead. Now, notice that the user never specifically said, I want an HTTP server object. It actually is an object that ends up created by the React application. And so you can intercept it here and say it should be an Nginx HTTP server. Right, if we go look at the laptop style here, you can see that whenever there's a service, we say, look, render that service to this service container set on the local Docker host. And that service container set object just comes from our comes from a library. Again, it's a library that we wrote, but you can write your own components too. That knows how to take that generic service and translate it into a Docker container instance using Docker run. The Kubernetes style is a little bit different in that it translates that service into a service deployment object based on the configuration that comes from this cluster info function, which by itself is not magic. It's just down here, and it just figures out where the Docker registry you want to use is, and it loads your, I'm using GKE here, so it's going to look up your Kubernetes on your kube config and populate all the data, but you can return that kube config however you want in there. You know, you can pull it from some secret store or whatever you want to do. The other cool thing to notice here is these components can actually be pretty sophisticated. So not only do they know how to build themselves and deploy themselves, they can do all sorts of cool things. So Postgres, for example, here is an abstract component, and we're replacing it with this test Postgres component. This test Postgres component actually understands how to take mock data and load it into the database. So now the developer didn't have to write a whole bunch of scripts to bring up the database, connect to the database, and then load that test data. All that logic is actually hidden inside this component. That component comes from a library, hopefully, that people publish. In this case, it does. And that means that all development teams now can use that and load the mock data. And so, for example, a DevOps team can build some of these components to build mocks or to build lightweight versions of the services that developers can use for various different environments. So in any case, our deployment here is done. So it's done all the builds and all the deployments. And so I go back to my web browser, I look at my GKE console, and I just ask it to you will see here that we have 4 Kubernetes services. One of them is of type external load balancer and actually has an endpoint that we can reach from outside the cluster. And if I click that, I now am at my app and I have movie database. I can come here and I can click and search for movie titles, right? V for Vendetta, right? And I can click movie titles. So I have a fully working app now that's running in Kubernetes. And so you can have as many of these styles as you want. You can have a test environment, production environment, staging, a local developer test. So if you are using, you know, some companies have virtual Kubernetes clusters or the ability to spin up a lightweight cluster. For example, this is a single node cluster for this demo on GKE. You can spin that cluster up and just send your code over there. And as a developer, I didn't need to know anything about Kubernetes to actually do this. But if I wanted to customize the database, I still didn't need to know anything about Kubernetes. But I actually can get into all the guts and do whatever I want with this particular system, right? And so you can see this is pretty standard, right? The workloads are just deployments. If I click on the deployment, you know, it'll tell me, okay, this is the deploy ID, this is for, and so on, right? There's some other annotations, and you can see the managed pod. So you can see everything that you would see if you want to get into the details with Kubernetes. But the point is that you didn't need to do that. So it's much easier to onboard developers and for them to work. So in any case, this is just one piece of the puzzle. I think there's still a lot more work that has to happen here, not just in terms of, say, libraries for Adapt, but we haven't talked about, well, how do you integrate tracing? How do you integrate visibility, logs, debugging? How do you connect to your Git repository? But all of these things should be really, really easy for the user to do. And so that's what I mean by great developer experience. So hopefully you found this talk useful. I haven't been paying attention to the chat, so I don't know if there's any questions or not, but I'm glad to answer any questions now. And you can find out more about Adapt by going to adaptjs.org.
Thanks, Manish. That's a really cool use of Kubernetes, actually. I don't see any questions in there, so if you have questions, please add them to the chat. In the meantime, Manish, what's a good way to reach out to you if anybody does have a question?
So I think for now, I don't actually monitor the Kubernetes channel very much. But if you want to reach out to me, my handle is at MVACHHAR on Twitter. And then from there, we can take it from there, or you can email me at manishv@unbounded.systems.
Great. All right.
I think my info is also on the Adapt.js page. I'm not 100% sure of that, but.
Awesome.
But
we did get one question from Andrew. He said you showed a 3-tier architecture demo, front-end, back-end DB. Is that fundamental, or just how does that starter was set up?
That is just how that starter was set up. So, for example, if you go here, you can do whatever you want. You can have other tiers in here, either using URL routers or something else. You can have an arbitrary number of components that you want to split up. It doesn't really matter. Adapt itself is completely agnostic to how you wanted to define your architecture. We did a 3-tier architecture starter because it's easy for developers to understand, but you can do whatever you want with that.
Cool. All right, thanks. Karen, anything else you want to say?
I had something and I forgot. Well, first off, thank you, Manish, for presenting. I think just a quick note, I brought this up earlier about CNCF moving platforms. We will eventually move this meetup group to their new platform, and it is under community.cncf.io, which I've now posted into the message chat. And then it looks like this meetup was recorded. I'm going to figure out where we can post these, so be on the lookout for that. And then if anyone is interested in speaking, please let Zach or myself know, especially if, like, you know, it's your first time speaking and you just kind of want to test the waters. I think right now with all these virtual meetups, it's a really great opportunity to do that if you're a little bit nervous. So yeah, take advantage of that. And then, yeah, Zach, do you have anything you want to add?
I do. I was going through sending everybody their Grubhub gift cards, and it looks like my card got flagged because that's very suspicious behavior. So I will sort that out tomorrow, and everybody else should see those gift cards come through sometime tomorrow. So that's it for me. Thanks everyone for joining. Really great turnout here and awesome demos from both Phil and Manish. So thanks to the presenters.
Cool. All right. Hopefully we will see everyone soon. Thank you.
Thanks, y'all. Bye.